For a night scene painting, a nocturnal scene, there are so many dark values that it can sometimes get a little bit confusing. So what I will do a lot of times is put in my biggest, darkest values, but I'll go back in and put in some light values as well. So I'm just going to lay in my darkest values kind of thin. So I'm using acrylic paint for this demo, and I might actually use a tiny bit of water to just loosen up some of the paint. And I'm just going to get those biggest, darkest values in first. And I can always come back in and darken them up again since they're thinner. They might be a little more translucent. And where I see those lights, those lighted words, farmer's market, the board behind the neon is lit up, so it's not pure black. So I'm painting it an orangey brown for now, and then I can darken up in between some of the letters a little bit later. And in fact, as it goes over to the right, I do see it darken, so I'll add more brown and a little bit of blue into that area. And what I'm really doing here is just adding my darkest darks as I see them and making them a little bigger than they need to be so that I can always crop in on them a little bit. So I'm not worried about being precious. It's okay if it's not perfect. I just want to get them in there, and then I can carve around them with my lights later. The big key here is, though, wherever I have a vertical, an up and down mark, I want to make sure that that vertical is up and down. I kind of have to look at the edges of my canvas to make sure I'm not skewing that too much. Now I've got a bunch of midtones, warm, really brights that are actually highlights, and some warmths in here, and then the really bright lights in this region here. And the farmer's market is pretty light too, with some reflected highlights down here. I already have a white background that I'm working on. That makes my life a little easier. I don't have to worry about putting in any whites. But what I might go is for some of those brightest values, some of those reds. And I'm just trying to look at the shapes that those reds are making. And if I'm trying to paint over a background that's too dark and I'm not able to cover that dark, I can add some white to the color and come back in later and just go over it by glazing it with some more of that that red and slightly a little bit of yellow mixed in there to get that exact right shade. But for now, the white, if I add it, really helps to make it more opaque. Any of these background areas that are just, I want to push in the background, I dry brush, give the hint of what's going on without any great detail. And that dry brushing just makes it look soft and fluffy, so it just kind of pushes it backward a little bit. Giving you the impression that something's there, but you don't know for sure what it is. I'm just going to put in some brown, see if that works for the color I'm looking for in most of these areas. I know there's going to be some darker areas in here too, but I just want to get some stuff set up. Anywhere I see it being a little bit more grayish or not quite as vibrant, I'm just going to add some of that blue to the color. I see a bunch of stuff going on back here. I don't want to put too much detail in. There's going to be some lights, but I'll just cover it all up for now with some darker values. I'm going to want to go even darker up in this top area down here. But I can go back and forth with it. And then later I'll dry brush in some of the bright highlights, but just getting some of those dark values put in now. And the midtones. For now, I'm not worrying about any of the brick. I just want to lay in values as I see them, and I will worry about all the detail later. The highlighted areas here, I'm just going to paint like a light brown. That's brown with white, but I might even add just a touch of that red to it as well. I just don't want to add every single little bit of detail, so I'm blurring my eyes to see what it is that I think is going on in here. I see a big white strip, and I see some grays with a bunch of little dark marks and light marks mixed in. So I'm just going to paint the mass grays in there and not worry about any of the little details yet. When you have a night scene and there's an area of bright light, it's usually going to be pretty warm. Everything around it might be cool. Obviously, we have some warms with the reflected light, but everything inside of this area, I'm going to make sure when I'm making these colors, I'm adding a bunch of yellow to the color so that it's a nice, bright, warm light. And I'm just really simplifying as much as I can. I'm going to go back in now and start reestablishing some of my dark values. And I just will dry brush wherever I see some of those darks happening. It may give me some impression of brick, but I just don't want to do a ton of detail on brick. So I'll have a few lines going off into the distance on an angle as such as I see in the photo. There is a neon light back here. It's a very blue color, almost leaning towards purple, actually. So I'm going to take my blue and add a little bit of red and some white and just kind of get the idea. And everything behind it actually is a little darker. So before I do that, I might actually just go in and darken up this area. And it's going to be lighter than this, but I'm starting off with that mix of that kind of almost leaning towards purpley color. So this is just a haze, just dry brushing with a, size 2 brush, nothing too small or detailed. You see this kind of hazy outline of the word farmers. And that's just going to be the glow of the light. The glow isn't as big on these letters up here. There's a small one, but it's not quite as big because there isn't as much behind it. This farmer's market, the letters are on a background there, but I'll still do one up at the top. It's less yellowy. It's just more of that kind of pinky. So red with some white. And same sort of thing. They're on a slightly different angle. So if I need to, I can always go in and get my white chalk. I can always get some chalk and reestablish that line. This is a gray chalk of where my lettering is going to go. Now I'm going to glaze over my clock again. I wanted that, vibrant kind of orangey reddish color in here. So I'm using, I didn't want it too orangey, but I wanted it lighter and more vibrant, I should say. So I've got my red with a little bit of that yellow mixed in. I'm just now glazing over top of what I had before. And anywhere I have some of those lights up on the ceiling, I'm going to start with the glow, which actually I'm going to use brown and yellow with white, and then wipe my brush off and just kind of do a dry brush, just a glow here, wherever those lights are going to be, making it bigger than what the light will be. And the key with lettering or with using this liner brush is really to pull the bristles down or towards you, not to push them. Don't try to go against the grain of the brush. That'll be difficult and you won't get a good mark. And obviously I'm rushing through this a little bit for the demo, but when you're working, you don't need to rush. Take your time. It doesn't mean you need to nitpick everything or put a ton of detail into everything, but just kind of take your time, decide where you're going to put your brush work, what direction it's going to go, how you're going to darken, where the lights and the darks are. Just take your time on it and decide, make decisions before you place your brush. It's kind of like the measure twice, cut once thing, but for painting. The same sorts of things apply. And whether I wanted to go into detail on the lettering or just kind of throw it in there, I mean, I can always decide that again later too, because I can always take some of this off and go back in and dry brush over it.